Awesome. Welcome to What the Fuck Do You Do, Season 3. We're going to have a really special guest today, concert violinist, professional violinist. What are you guys excited about for today?
Excited on her for her to dunk on you with her violin skills.
Well, you guys are just not musically inclined at all.
I was on drumline in high school.
I've never heard you talk about that.
You saw me perform.
I've never heard you talk about it today.
Well, I'm not like proud of it.
Well,
I guess I'm proud of it.
Then you're clearly not good enough.
I would like to splice in some footage here of the Thunder drumline performance where we dress like aliens.
I can't wait till you tell this professional violinist that you played the drum line in middle school.
I will. I'm going to be like, so that makes me the same as you, right?
Oh, God.
We're in for one today. Honestly, this episode is a little trippy for me because I already feel like a bad Asian because I don't play any instruments and she's just like fantastic at them. So definitely going to be a little bit of anxiety there. But
Wouldn't that be like everybody we've interviewed, though? Like sales manager.
honestly, yeah.
There were a lot of Asians that played violin when I was growing up.
They're sick.
Can confirm.
It's a rite of passage.
They were pretty good, yeah.
Yeah, tell us about your St. Stephen's orchestral experience.
Well, I wasn't. Me and the conductor had a little bit of tension.
Wait, really?
You sound like a diva.
Well, it's because he didn't like that I played basketball.
Oh, it's like you can only be a one-sport athlete, and
Yeah.
your sport is violin.
Yeah.
This is the plot from High School Musical.
He. I remember he after like rehearsal or something, he like followed me out as I was leaving, and he was like, "Shrey, you got to give up the threes, man."
No.
Oh, that's so gross.
I was like, I don't know.
Did you start dribbling in like perfect concert rhythm
I was
when
just
the
like,
musical number started?
yeah, I don't know.
What chair were you?
Let's see. I think freshman year I was put in like second violin. And then I got moved to like first, second chair. We all alternate like senior year.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Welcome to What the Fuck Do You Do, Season 3. We got a really awesome guest today. I'm actually really excited about this one. Alexandria is a professional musician here in New York City. Alexandria, welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about what the fuck do you do as a professional musician?
Yeah, so as a musician, I mainly play the violin. So I'm a violinist.
Let's go.
And I spent many, many years in school specializing in the violin. So many hours in a practice room practicing mainly classical music. But ironically, I don't spend a whole lot of time playing classical music anymore. But yeah, you would say that I am a classically trained violinist.
Yeah, just drop the mic on Shrey.
Shrey, are you a classically trained violinist?
I did classical music, growing up all the way through when I took lessons through high school. I did not pursue it in college at all, though.
Mm-hmm.
But I know because a lot of people that did music in college, they were spending hours and hours practicing. Like, it's a very, very difficult major to pursue. So why don't you tell us, okay, how'd you get started?
So I didn't have a traditional start. Most people traditionally, if you do like the whole classical music route, you start when you're like 3 to 6 years old. Wow. They give you a tiny little violin or a cello or some people viola.
So cute.
Yeah, and you would take lessons once a week and do other various music activities as a kid throughout all the way through high school. But I did not start until I was 9. I started in my elementary school orchestra program. And let's see, where did I go from there? Oh, but I didn't start taking lessons until I was 15, which is a very late start.
Yeah.
Because I think someone, like some music teachers, saw that I kind of had a knack for it. And they told my parents, oh, you should like really get her into lessons, maybe sign her up for a summer camp or something. And I took my first lesson when I was 15, and I instantly fell in love with it.
Wow.
And I told my teacher, I was like, I want to do this for the rest of my life. And she looked at me. She was like, "Well, you have a lot of catching up to do. You're very behind, but we can certainly try and see how far we can get you." And I auditioned for a few conservatories. I only got into one, which is a miracle on its own. And that's where I really did the catch-up work in a conservatory for my undergraduate.
So what was it about that first lesson, that first like real experience when you were 15 that made you fall in love with the violin specifically?
Well, now I know that my personality type, I'm quite addicted to challenges. If I feel challenged by something, I want to like prove that I can do it. But at the time, I just saw it as like this really intimidating subject that I knew nothing about. It actually kind of felt horrible, but I just really wanted to like prove that I could not be horrible at it someday. And I even remember I signed up for like an after school music program that my new teacher had recommended to me. And the first night that I was there, I was so overwhelmed and intimidated by all the kids who had like a traditional musical training. And my mom picked me up and she was like, well, how was your first day at the music program? And I just started bawling my eyes out. I was like, it was so hard. I didn't know what I was doing. But yeah, I just kept coming back for more punishments.
Did you have a good teacher?
Yeah. Very understanding, very good at catching me up to where I needed to get to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like teachers make or break a lot of people's experiences in learning anything, right?
Definitely.
And especially with violin, it's such a hard craft to learn
Mm-hmm.
that a teacher can definitely crush someone's spirits if they want to, or they can make it fun and also challenging at the same time.
Yeah, the student to teacher relationship is a very close one, and you can have quite an impact on someone's life, even if they don't pursue music professionally. Yeah, it's a very delicate thing. You don't want to like have an impact on someone in a negative way.
What makes someone a good teacher in like the music world? Or is that like person to person?
I feel like it's such a varied opinion, but I feel like a good teacher is very patient because you're teaching something that's abstract at the end of the day. So everybody's going to be different in how they interpret music. So you need to be very patient with maybe certain students who take a long time to get it. Like that was me at one point. I did have a teacher who would get very frustrated with me because I wasn't dumb, but it felt that way sometimes because I'd be like, I just don't get what this is. It took me forever to get certain concepts. Yeah, I think patience is like the biggest one that I'll get into on that.
Yeah, I just think of like the teacher from Whiplash whenever I think about like classical music instructors. I'm like, that's not what I would really want.
No, but luckily that's not too realistic. There aren't professors who act like there are professors who have like short tempers.
Yeah.
They kind of like blow up like that, but not in the Hollywood way. Like
They don't throw a whole drum at you from across the room.
No.
Are professors usually like the best musicians? Because I wonder, like, in a lot of other professions, right, the people who are teaching it may have had a ton of insight, but may have not had like the most talent themselves. In the music world, are there credentials that you need to be a professor, like in terms of like how you play and where you've played, or like how does one become an authority figure there?
Yeah, I mean, there are professors who get their positions by how successful they are as performers, but you don't have to go that route. There are plenty of very famous teachers who, you need the experience. You need to have, put in the hours on an instrument and know how to play the repertoire. But there are plenty of teachers who don't necessarily perform so much. One like really famous violin teacher, Dorothy DeLay, she taught like every single prodigy you can think of from the late 1900s who are famous now. But I don't know if there's any recordings of her playing. She wasn't really a performer in that way, but she was able to churn out those prodigies.
And at what point did you personally feel like you were good? Because I feel like when anyone learns an instrument, everyone sounds pretty bad.
Yeah.
Like, bless my parents' heart, it sounded bad for a while before it started sounding remotely passably good. So what point do you feel like after you started taking lessons did you feel like I'm starting to sound good, I'm starting to feel confident about this?
Yeah. I think there is something to the whole 10,000 hours theory because now that I can look back on it, I didn't really feel like I was a good musician, or I didn't feel confident in being able to play things well until I was around 25, 24 years old, which would have been the 10,000 hour. I had put in about 10 years of training at that point. And I remember it sort of clicking and sort of feeling very confident that I could walk into a room, I could play anything you put on the music stand. Yeah, so it's only been, I'm 28 now. It's only been like 3 to 4 years that I felt like I could do what I do.
That's wild. So in the meantime, like during those middle years, you were in a conservatory. You were, I assume, like performing a lot as well. Like, how are you psyching yourself up when you don't feel like a mass? You know, how are you building that difference in your mind going into a concert?
How do I psych myself up? Especially when I wasn't like, where I am now. I don't know. I think a lot of musicians, a lot of artists, it's very tough because you definitely you eventually begin to identify with what you're doing as a form of self. And you do go through moments of feeling very low about what you're doing. I mean, the first few times I would perform just like in a classroom setting, I just felt like shit. Like every time I'm like, I sound horrible. Like all of my peers sound so much better than me. And that's this whole, internal dialogue that a lot of people go through. Even if you have been taking lessons for a really long time, for a lifetime, you can still struggle with that inner dialogue. And I guess it's just, sort of like a muscle. You have to exercise pushing yourself to put yourself out there. And the more you do it, the less horrible it feels and the easier it feels, and you can sort of feel more confident about doing it.
When you started to feel that confidence, like, yes, I can do this, I'm a great musician, was that after a performance? Was that after like a practice session? Like, where were you when you felt that?
Well, I think one of the really big steps that I took was when I finally had a professional level instrument. I saved up all my paper clips and pennies for I think, how old was I when I bought it? It was the last year of my undergrad, so I would have been 22. So I had saved up for 4 years, my entire degree, to buy this instrument that cost the same amount as a car.
What?
Yeah. And all those years before, I'd been playing on $1,000 violin, which is, in terms of violins, that's dirt cheap. And there's just certain things that don't sound as good on a cheap violin. So when I finally bought that professional level instrument, I just felt like there was this whole range of sounds I was able to achieve. I think that was the first step into feeling like, wow, okay, I can kind of do this.
That's so interesting to me because, I've always heard about Stradivarius, right? These $1 million violins, and apparently, if you're a musician, you always hear the reactions. It's like, wow, it feels so right, playing on these. What is it? What is the difference between, a cheap starter violin and one of these legacy, incredibly handmade instruments?
I've never touched a Stradivarius, so I don't know what it feels like
or
to
at
play
least
one of those.
$1,000 to
but
$30,000.
The most expensive violin I've ever played was a $200,000 one.
What? That's a house.
Yeah, I know. I was backstage at a concert, and this violin was like, oh yeah, someone's loaning me this instrument. That's most of these musicians, by the way, who are playing these instruments, they can't afford them. It's just really nice rich people let them loan out an instrument.
So they'll just have them in their collection, and they'll just be like, yes, you can play my...
Yeah, oh, you sound really good, and, they have, maybe a business relationship with them, or if someone's, really famous in the field, they...
What a flex.
Yeah. So the most expensive instrument I've ever tried was $200,000, and it's so hard to describe. There's a certain level of, resonance that you can get out of the instrument. It just sounds good. It sounds better. It's like driving, a cheap car versus an expensive car. There's just a certain feel that is more expensive, nicer.
So do you feel, because instruments cost so much, and there is a big step up from sort of the entry level $1,000 violin and, these thousands of dollars violins, do you feel that this is something that is accessible to people to pursue?
Yeah, so... There are, in terms of just the classical music field, which I feel like I can talk a lot about, there are, things that you can apply for if you come from a family of not good income, or if you come from an underserved community. That is getting better. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of diversity initiatives, things like that, that you can apply for and have access to. But that does not change the fact that perhaps the field is a little inaccessible, a lot inaccessible, and very intimidating. There's just all kinds of terminology and things that are not common household knowledge. So if you don't come from a musical family, it's like how am I supposed to know where to start, where to look, things like that. So the instruments are expensive. That does make it a bit exclusive, as a bit unfair. But there are cheap instruments. I started on a very cheap instrument, and I crawled and climbed my way to an expensive instrument.
And you got into a conservatory, which is insanely impressive.
Yeah, thank you. So when there's a will, there's a way. It does need to be more accessible. But to answer your question, it is a bit exclusive, unfortunately.
So to somebody who has no understanding, like what's the difference between a conservatory and like your traditional university undergrad experience?
I think today there's not, if the school has a good reputation, good professors, a good program, there really isn't much of a difference. What it used to be was a conservatory was a school specifically dedicated to music. There was sort of a prestige about it, and there is still prestige in a conservatory. And then, a university was more like the traditional college experience. You have your electives and all these things. And it might be more affordable. But now there are universities out there that have amazing music programs. So,
in terms of like the application process for one of these conservatories, like how does that all work? Because I'm sure there's so many good musicians that are wanting to get these spots, and there are probably not that many. Like, is it just a giant concert that you play for them? Or like, how does someone get into that ecosystem, I guess?
It's very competitive, because they only accept so many students a year. And they only give so much scholarship. I mean, some of these conservatories and universities, they cost so much, and that's for any major. It can get really expensive, so you do need a good scholarship. But the audition process, basically, they give you a list of required things that you have to play. For like freshman undergraduate college, it's usually like, you have to have. This is going to be a lot of terminology. You have to play like scales, which is just like basic bricklaying of music, and then they'll have like a standard concerto, which is for an instrument that's basically like their time to shine. It's a solo piece that you would traditionally play with an orchestra, and then they usually have like, you need to also bring a movement from a sonata, which is more it's like a concerto without the orchestra. You usually play with piano or something like that. And then they have like an unaccompanied piece that you have to play. For violin, that's usually Bach or Paganini. Those are composers. I'm throwing around a lot of terminology right now.
Go for it. That's great.
I'm just throwing you into the fire on this one. So basically, to sort of make that easier to understand, there's like a list of requirements that you have spent years preparing. That you should be, if you're really prepared, you should be very comfortable playing through like thousands of notes on your instrument. Yes, so that is the audition process. You walk into the room, you have a panel of professors or judges, and they will say, okay, we're going to pick some things from the list, play your concerto, and you just have to play it. And that's like the standard audition setup, even as a professional musician.
They just tell you play X song, and you just have to know it like that?
Well, you come prepared with the requirements, and so like, let's say there's a concerto. You don't have to play like any concerto. It's the one that you prepared. So like, I prepared Mozart's Fifth Concerto for violin, and you give them a list in advance, like, that's what I prepared for you today. That's my concerto, and they'll go, we would love to hear that.
And are they looking for like technical expertise from people at this level, or is it like creativity, like why they chose what they chose? Like, how does that judging process work? Generally.
It depends on what you're auditioning for.
Fair enough.
Are we still on the subject of like auditioning for college or auditioning for a job? Okay. If you're auditioning for school, they're going to look for, how much does this kid already know? Do they know enough to at least start at the entry level of a freshman year course? So, they're looking for a certain level of technical ability. They're not going to be looking for a professional level of technical ability, because then what's the point of going to school? They want to look for a kid who shows promise and does have things that they need to improve on because then they need to spend time doing something in school. So yeah, they're looking for like a level of technicality that shows that they've been playing for a while and that they're ready to go to that next level.
And then what does a typical day look like at conservatory?
A lot of music. You wake up for, traditionally every freshman goes through 8 a.m. music theory.
Oh, that sounds brutal.
That's the first thing I want to do in the morning.
Yeah, really gets you going. So music theory is basically the math of music, and it gets very advanced. By the time you're at the final level of music theory, they have you doing like matrices and stuff like that. It's very pointless. It's very difficult. But yes, you start with music theory, then you have music history, which starts all the way back from like the 1400s-ish and goes to modern time, through all the courses that you take. And then you have different rehearsals. So you have orchestras that you play in, you have smaller ensembles that you play in. Just everything, every subject you can imagine that has to do with music. And you have your private lessons that you take with your professor. That's the professor you have the closest relationship with, because you see them usually twice a week, if not more, every single week of the school year, because you see them for your private lessons, which is when you work on your own personal repertoire. And then you see them during studio class, which is when all of their students come together and they meet and you play for each other and learn from each other.
So are you like dreaming and sleeping in musical notes and like?
Yeah, and I had a very good undergraduate experience, so I sort of look at music conservatories as a very like bubbly and like bright experience, and not everybody has that. It can be really tough. It can be a lot to go through. So it's not always unicorns and puppy dogs, But for me, it kind of felt like that because it was so new to me. I was so new to the world of music.
Well, I think what's so tough is, like, even my college major, it's like, hey, I didn't do the homework. Like, can I see what you did? But I don't think you can fake your way through music conservatory. Like, you have to go to rehearsal. You have to play. It's you.
Yeah, and it's just embarrassing when you don't when you show up unprepared. I mean, everybody does it. You show up unprepared. You're a kid. What do you care?
Right.
There's going to be times where you rather go to a party than prepare for orchestra. Like, what?
Your version of like, I didn't do the reading is like, I can't play this.
Yeah, no, I literally get, like, we call it sight reading when you show up and you're looking at the music for the first time ever and it's like time to play it. That's called sight reading. And you would just show up sight reading and you're like, wow, I fucked up. This is bad. This is embarrassing. Yeah.
I imagine for me, like thinking about practicing thousands of hours on like the same notes over and over, I would have like, a full burnout explosion moment. Like the level of discipline to keep practicing things when you're not sounding good, like you're really trying to get it down. Like, did you feel burnout at all when you were going through, 3-4 years of intense music experience?
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of burnout in the music industry, actually, because there's sort of and I would say that's one of the maybe toxic things that music school implements is that the grind culture, where you need to be practicing for hours a day and no social life, never leaving the practice room. Because some, I knew piano students who would practice like 8 hours a day because if there's an instrument that has too many notes to learn, it's a piano. They have so many freaking notes to learn. So they would just be in the practice room all day, every day till like odd hours of the night. And these students do burn out eventually if you don't learn balance in life. And maybe that's changed now because I've been out of school for long enough, but most schools do not teach you what balance is. They just teach you to push these hours into practicing. So there is a lot of burnout. I think I didn't realize what I was experiencing was burnout because what would happen was it would be like a winter break or a summer break. I would go home and I literally wouldn't touch my instrument for multiple months. And at the time, I was like, oh, well, it's summer break. Why do I need to touch my instrument? But what it really was probably a level of burnout. Yeah.
Yeah, I see like the memes. It's like, what, Ling, 40 hours a day?
Yeah.
It's like what you have to practice.
Uh-huh.
So leaving conservatory, I'm super curious because, think about your traditional college majors. Maybe you're interning, you're looking for like a new graduate role or that entry-level position. Like, what is it like to graduate school as a musician and try to approach it as a career? Like, what was your experience like doing that?
I was very lucky. because after I was done with my master's, I went straight through bachelor's, master's, and I was auditioning for fellowships or basically like paid internships for musicians. And I got into what's called the Civic Orchestra of Chicago, where I was living at the time. And that's, in a general sense, a paid internship through the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, right? So I was playing in the Civic Orchestra. We are all young musicians, young professionals, just trying to get a better grasp on how to get a real job. And that's, it's paid, and we perform and work with amazing conductors, and you also get like lessons and stuff like that through the Chicago Symphony. That's what a lot of people end up doing. You graduate with your very expensive degrees, and you go out and you look for these fellowships or young professional music programs. That's basically like the halfway house into being a professional musician.
Everyone's like struggling artists.
Yeah.
And how do you, I guess we had the pleasure of seeing you perform Notorious B.I.G. So not classical music. You've been doing these kind of awesome gigs that are not traditional orchestras. How have you gone about finding these type of opportunities?
It started while I was still in school, my master's in Chicago. I started getting into recording studio orchestras, and I loved it. I mean, the music it sounded great. It was mostly R&B and hip hop. And that was specifically the orchestra I was playing with was called the Matt Jones Orchestra. Phenomenal strings arranger, Matt Jones. And we played on like NPR Tiny Desk. We played with Kanye. We recorded for John Legend and like all these people. And I was just like, amazing. And it was more, I guess that was my first step into the freelancing world, where it's word of mouth. You are absolutely getting work based on your reputation and what people know about you. There's no audition process for that. And so that's how I sort of got started in playing not classical music. But I was still majority classical. I was even like, there was a point where I thought I was going to dedicate my whole career to Baroque and early music, which is like 15th and 16th century music. I really thought I was going to do that. It was the nerdiest chapter of my life. But then the pandemic hit, and everything ground to a halt, as we all know. And I sort of realized I did not want to dedicate my life to classical music. I was like, why am I worshiping a relic? And that's not to classical music has a very special place in my heart. It has given me so much. I still play it. I still appreciate it. I still listen to it. But it just felt like if I want to really be a voice of today, I needed to play non-traditional music,
Well, and I think it's so interesting because for the longest time, violin, viola, cello, all these orchestral instruments, they were used to play classical instruments. Mm-hmm. But now you've seen in the last 30, 40 years, hip-hop, R&B, all these genres of music are using these classical instruments to help shape that sound. So are these conservatories, are all these music programs, are they infusing those type of genres when people are learning the craft? Because I feel like it's important to sort of shape or have that sort of influence on people who are learning violin, that you don't have to just play classical. You can do these different types of paths.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I've been out of the school scene for so long. I don't know. I doubt they are. I have a feeling they're still learning, Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, which, again, nothing wrong with that. I'm not trying to say that music is no good. And the thing about playing, all these hip hop and R&B gigs is, that has nothing to do with classical music. But the skills that I'm using are from classical training. Like, I'm playing all these 30-second notes, which is the term we use for like really fast notes. All these like scales and all the technical stuff I'm doing is from a classical music training. And not that you need that to play those notes, but it's sort of hard to imagine how I would have gotten where I am if I had not, learned my Beethoven sonatas and my Mozart concertos. I don't know. I'm sure there is a way around it, but I don't know what that path would look like.
You talked about like right after the conservatory, like being part of the civic symphony, right? As you go through that process, like at what point can a musician like go off on their own so where they're not needing a symphony? Like at what point can you just be like, I'm Alexandria, I have these credentials, hire me instead of being a part of an orchestra? Like how do you advance outside of the orchestra piece, I guess?
I'm still discovering that. I don't have like a foolproof answer for that yet, because I am sort of in that moment in my life where I'm like, I want people to hire me because it's me and not just because, I'm musician number 12 on stage that, if I broke my wrist tomorrow, someone could just step in. So yeah, I'm still discovering how to get out of that orchestral component and how to sort of, carve out my own identity in the industry. And be a little more individual. Yeah.
What are some of the best concerts or like most favorite concerts that you have from the past few years? You mentioned some pretty unbelievable people you've played with.
I would say at the Lincoln Center, where you guys saw that was one of my favorites, just because the music was so good. It was music arranged by Miguel Atwood Ferguson, who also played on the stage. He was like the lead violinist. Oh my God, that music was so good.
It was awesome.
Yeah. What was cool is they also let us like get out of our seats and like actually vibe with the music, not just sitting there.
Yeah, I never know when to clap when I go to
but it doesn't always have to be like this big prestigious stage, with 1,000 people listening. I think another favorite moment recently, I played a show for a really close friend of mine, Caitlin Edwards. She's a violinist as well, and she recorded her first album, and she finally had the opportunity to perform it live with an orchestra behind her, and that music was phenomenal, and it was such a special moment to like see all of my really close friends in Chicago come together to like make this music happen, and my homegirl Caitlin was able to like shine and do her thing. So that would also be like a favorite moment recently that I've done. Yeah.
What about the flip side? What are the fuck ups?
Some bad ones?
the biggest flops. The like I forgot the notes in front of 1,000 people moments.
That's never. I haven't had a flop on my end, but just because when you're playing in an orchestra, there's really no pressure because there's so many of you, and the pressure is more on maybe the headliner or the conductor or the soloist. That's the one thing I might really love about being an orchestra. There's no pressure. I show up. I show up prepared. I know the notes, and I'm just there to like have a good time and be a musician. But I would say I don't want to. This is like such a long story, and it used to be the story that I would tell a million times. So I'm not gonna go into all the details. But I would say like one of the biggest flops was definitely when I played with Kanye.
Was it him? Did he do something?
Alexandria, we need a clip.
Well, it was just, he decided that he was going to write an opera in 7 days, which doesn't happen.
Why am I not surprised?
So without me spending or wasting your entire podcast episode on this story, it was a mess because it was like, oh, we have 24 hours to make this happen. And it didn't have we got on the stage, we played some notes, but the press ripped it to shreds, and it was such a flop.
Wait, so you didn't get the music, you didn't get any chance to practice until 24 hours before the show?
But yeah, I got a call on a Wednesday from a contractor, and they were like, can you get to LA on Friday? It pays this much amount of money, and it's for Kanye. I was like, hell yes. I'm going to cancel all my plans. Yeah. And I will be there on Friday. Yeah, so it was for the musicians and the dancers, because there were dancers on there too. It was a 48-hour notice.
Damn yay.
When you got the music and you looked at it, you're like, no, this ain't it? Or...
Well, the music, so it was the string arrangement was by Matt Jones, who I mentioned earlier. So it was a great arrangement, but Kanye ended up cutting almost all of it. So we only played like 4 lines of music. We played just like whole notes for like 2 minutes, and that's all the orchestra was used for. So it was like, wow, this did not work out.
So what does a typical day look like for you now? Because I'm sure you got to practice, you got to find these opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Every day is different, which is a wonderful thing, also a terrifying thing. Some days I will be really busy. Other days I have absolutely nothing, which I've learned now when there are days of nothing, that's days for self-care, for slowness, for maybe, working on your own music, things like that. So every day is different. I mean, I've had days where I'm busy from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., which is a lot. Every day is different.
And you mentioned earlier that you're thinking about or starting to record a little bit of your own music for EP. You want to plug that a little bit?
Yeah, so I have 2 singles out. I started releasing my own music as a singer-songwriter under the moniker Ace. Ace with a dot at the end, because apparently there's like 10,000 aces out there, and they wouldn't let me choose just Ace. Yes, and so I finally have enough material to hopefully work on an EP. I literally have a meeting with the producer after this to see if he would want to work with me on some of these songs. So we'll see. I mean, he could totally reject me after the meeting. I have no idea. But the hope is to start working on my first EP, yes.
What do you want to say through your music on your EP?
What do I want to say?
Yeah, what's the message of the album?
So assuming that it's hard to talk about this because right now it's literally just like on like the day one sort of level of production. But the idea will be to call it Hopeless Romantic because I'm a hopeless romantic. And all of the songs will be basically my experience with love so far in life.
And what genre is it?
Soul and R&B, a little bit of jazz.
Yeah, who are like when it comes to writing your own music, like who do you take influence from, or like who do you feel has been like very impactful in your life as a musician?
Mm-hmm. Definitely old school jazz musicians. Billie Holiday, Sarah Vaughan, singers like that. And then neo soul artists, so Erykah Badu, Jill Scott are some. I mean, I have been listening to neo soul singers since I was in diapers, right? And so their music just feels like it means a lot to me. So I would say those are like the top 2 biggest influences are jazz and neo soul.
Not Paganini. I hear you're the bad boy.
No, that man tortured me for years. I'm over Paganini.
Is there a classical composer where you're like, you know what? I think they might have a little too much hype.
Oh, of course. But I'm a little scared to like say those composers. I mean, they're all dead white men, so nobody's gonna come
they're not
for
coming
me.
for you. Yeah.
I won't get into like specific composers, but yes, there are composers. None of them are like, well, I have this one controversial opinion.
Yeah.
A really close friend of mine thinks I'm crazy for this, but I don't really care for a lot of Mozart's music.
Ooh.
We were in Austria when we went to Salzburg, and they love Mozart
Oh, of
there.
course they
So
do.
we don't have a big Austrian listener base, I don't think yet.
Yeah, hope not.
Mainly by
I mean, don't get me wrong. There's certain hits that Mozart put out there. That man knew what he was doing. But he was a prodigy, and he churned out music on the daily. So some of his stuff is just like, he was like, yeah, I'll just write this little ditty. And people worship it like his. I don't want to get too into this because I don't want to get canceled.
He's just putting singles out
Yeah,
there.
he's just putting mad singles, but some of them are flops.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's got bad.
It's like
bad
Drake.
games. Yeah.
I was literally going to say it's like Drake.
Drake's albums, bad.
Yeah.
Singles are good. Yeah.
So, okay, you brought up prodigies, and that's something I've been really curious about because I feel like in music you have, I see these clips of 10-year-olds, 12-year-olds playing with like the most famous orchestras in the world, and there's kind of this child prodigy element that I don't think exists in many other professions. Like, have you played with prodigies? Have you like been around that? What is it like to have
Are you
someone
one?
like that? Yeah.
I'm not a prodigy. I just worked hard. But what's it like to be around them? I mean, they're people.
Yeah.
Like, It's like hanging around anyone else. They just have this amazing skill that they somehow were born with. I mean, they were born with it, but then they took that, innate, I guess, ability, and then it was formed into something amazing by a good teacher. Because you can be a prodigy, but if you never get connected with a teacher, you can't. There's only so far you can go in terms of classical music. So it's just like a crazy skill, like any other to witness and be around.
Just have like a 6-year-old performing a solo with your whole orchestra.
Yeah.
But they're probably like child actors. Like they have like no life, right?
If anything, the parents are more of a character to be around, right? Because they're just kids. They're like, yeah, I'm just here to play the violin. But the parents are usually the ones that are like making sure they practice at all hours and making sure they show up to all of the classes and the programs. And
That sounds about right.
Were you a prodigy, Justin?
No, that's why I'm in sales. I think every Chinese family wants their kid to be a professional composer. That wasn't it. I had to go play outside.
I was told growing up that of all the orchestra instruments, violinists are the divas. Do you agree?
we are.
Wow.
Yes.
We're the nerds.
The nerds.
Yeah.
The flugelhorns.
It's the cymbals people.
We're all nerds. I mean, you have to be if you're going to dedicate your life to an instrument. Come on, nerd. But there's stereotypes for every instrument in the orchestra.
Oh, let's go. Well, let's hear them.
Let's go section by section.
All right, so brass are like the frat bros. They drink beer.
Band camp.
Band camp. I should say the frat people because there are women who play brass. Yeah, so
Fair enough.
they're the Greek
Fair,
life
yeah.
of the orchestra. And then you have woodwinds, and those are very. I guess it depends on the type of woodwind. They're very particular people. They play very small instruments, and they focus on very small things. So, for example, the oboe, they just spend hours making reeds, these little itty bitty mouthpieces. I love oboe players. This is not me saying it's a bad thing, by the way.
They're just crafting.
Yeah, they're craftsmen.
Yeah.
Yeah, woodwind players are craftsmen. This is so nobody meets me out on the street to beat me up.
I heard what you said about the oboe.
I feel like you're also describing the personality of the instruments.
Yeah.
Brass is like boom, boom, like super like in your face.
Well,
right?
I mean, credit to the brass. There are some beautiful brass sounds out there, like French horn. Oh, I love me some French horn. Shout out to the French horn player. And then you have, what am I skipping here? Percussion.
That's me.
Percussion. Was that
I was
you?
on drumline.
He was so excited to tell you that.
The percussion is in terms of orchestra, they feel like the outliers because in a fascinating way, in a way that I love, they make music by hitting things that aren't necessarily, they are notes in a scientific point of view, but they're not notes. Like you're hitting something and making music out of it. I think that's fascinating. I love drummers, like drum set, especially in jazz and stuff like that, because I mean they say stuff without playing a note in terms of melody. They make a melody out of sound. That doesn't make any sense what I just said, but it made sense in my head. So yeah, the percussionists are they're the different ones and in a really fascinating way. And then you have string players. And the string player stereotypes is definitely like the range of your instrument affects how chill you are. So we'll start with bass players. That's so chill.
They feel
That's
chill.
bass across every form of music.
They cannot be bothered. Yeah. So then you have cellists, one step up, also super chill. Cellists are my favorite. They're like the most wholesome, I feel, of the string players. I don't know. Well, to me, it's the closest to like the range of most human voices. It's like the tenor range. And it's a little intimate to like hold an instrument between your legs and you're like playing all these sexy ass notes. Like, It's a sexy instrument.
Wait, we went from wholesome to that's a sexy instrument.
You're just loving
Also,
their
wholesome and sexy and loving, you know.
Everyone out there shaking their oboe like, God
It's
damn
like,
it.
oh, why did I get into reeds?
And then violas, lovely violas. I don't know when, how, or why they turned into the butt of all the orchestra jokes, but they did, and I don't get why. Like, it's a great instrument. But I guess if we're going on levels of like chillness, right, they're still pretty low, like in terms of like range. So very chill people. And then you have violinists who are, I see us as like little birds. We're just up here singing our melodies. And look at me. I'm so pretty.
Are all viola players jealous that they're not violin players?
No, I think there's a viola joke about that. I don't think so. Every violist I know loves being a violist. They're like, I don't want to play all those high notes and all those like crazy ass melodies and stuff like that. Yeah. So violinists are very high energy, love to be in the spotlight, divas, as you said. We're all divas in some way. But yes, those are, I think I hopefully covered everything in the orchestra in terms of stereotypes.
What about maestros?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, the conductors. Well, you know, that's the boss of the orchestra. So I feel like everybody has a very similar experience with bosses, right? Even if they're like the best boss in the world, it's your boss.
We're not gonna hang out with you.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. A conductor they don't live a lonely life. They're very social. But, you know, yeah, maybe you aren't going to hang out with the conductor after rehearsal.
Do they have power trips like some bosses do?
Yeah, definitely.
You hate to see that.
Hate it.
But also, I mean, you are in charge, so you have to take charge. Like, nobody wants a conductor who's like, well, if it's okay with you guys.
Yeah, that's
no,
like
you gotta call the
60
shots.
people that you gotta run around, you know.
Yeah.
So whatever you want to play is fine.
So do you see all these stereotypes and dynamics playing out? Like if you guys want to go hang out outside of rehearsal, where like violinists are like, I just want to talk about myself, and percussion's like, we're just the other people.
No.
And the brass people are like doing beer bong shots.
Not at all. Like, again, like, to save my ass, like, these are just like the stereotypes that are implemented on the instruments, right?
We didn't make them.
Yeah, I did not make them. It's just like things that, you know, we've absorbed over time through the industry. But like people tell me all the time, like, you don't seem like a violinist. You're too chill to be a violinist. Yeah, so obviously, like, these stereotypes mean nothing. I have friends who play woodwind instruments. I have friends who play brass instruments.
Good
like,
politicking here. Yeah, this is good. If you had to play a completely different instrument professionally, which instrument would you choose?
Cello. After I just
Yeah,
hyped
true.
up cello like that.
That's true. Cello sounds fun.
What do you think is the hardest instrument to learn?
Piano, definitely.
Why is that?
There's so many notes. I don't
Two
know how
hands.
they do it. 2 hands and every finger has its own sense of rhythm. It's a lot.
Yeah, piano's intense.
Well, and you need space,
Mhm.
right? Like you can carry an instrument, a lot of instruments around and go practice wherever, but you have to also find a piano to go play and practice on the regular.
Yeah.
That's difficult too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to that point, like we live in New York. Like, how do you practice? Like in your apartment?
Do your neighbors hate you?
I've been lucky with the neighbor situation. All of my not all my neighbors, all my roommates have either been musicians or, you know, they love musicians. So, and I'm not the type who's gonna practice at midnight. I'm a day person. I prefer to practice when the sun's out. So I've never like annoyed the neighbors with like my late hours of music. But I've heard some nightmare situations of friends who live somewhere and the neighbors like will make noise complaints, even though they'll be very like reasonable about their practice hours and what they're practicing. Some people can't have neighbors who will be very aggressive about needing their silence. But for me, I mean, the violin is a travel-friendly instrument. So wherever I am, I can practice. I've yet to run into the issue of like, I don't want to hear that. Like, turn noise off.
I don't want to hear this beautiful music.
This lovely concerto.
You're also good. I imagine if someone was starting, they'd be like, God damn it.
Oh yeah, no. If I ever have kids, you know, they'll be able to do whatever they want, but I'm not going to encourage them to start an instrument because I don't want to hear it.
Now, do you feel that playing an instrument has helped you in creating music?
Wait, ask the question again.
Playing an instrument, like learning how to master the violin, and you're working on music that you want to create, like producing, composing, arrangement, all that stuff. Do you feel like that helped translate and helped you with creation?
Yes and no. I actually feel like I'm really struggling in that department because I have all of this training to play the violin. I do not have the training to write music. Now, obviously, there's some things that translate. Like, I know music theory, so I know, you know, what chords sound right and, you know, typical progressions to use. But really, outside of that, I mean, producers are amazing. I feel like producers are the modern day composers. They just have so many skills that I don't have, and I wish I had.
I think they get no credit also.
Really?
Well, I just feel like rappers get the credit.
Yeah.
But the production behind it was incredible, but you don't really hear and the producer on the artist tag.
I feel like, and this is just me making an assumption, so I could be wrong. I feel like producers are okay with that. They just want to write the music. They're not looking for the fame necessarily. Even though, I mean, a producer may not be as famous as Beyonce, but there are famous producers out there because they're writing all the famous people's music, like, and they're making, you know, 6 figures a month just from being so damn good. So yeah, I feel like producers aren't there for the spotlight, but you can still be a very well-known producer making insane amount of money.
Just dropping your tag in there.
Yeah, you gotta have a good tag.
DJ Cam.
Yeah.
We're gonna end it on that.
Yeah, right. Well, so where do you go from here? You're making your first EP, which is awesome, in the studio. You're still performing like amazing gigs all over the country. Like you were in Chicago recently. You have gigs in New York. What's kind of the plan? Is it just continuing to escalate the types of gigs that you get and produce your own music, or where do you want to take it?
I'm trying. And again, this is still brand new to me, so I don't know what the solution is, but I'm trying to find a way to make my own music be sought after for what I do and create. You know, I want people to be like, oh, we want to hire her to play her show because we love what she does. Whereas right now, as I freelance, and this isn't not always the case, but in a lot of like big freelance gigs, it's like we need 20 violinists, so let's start calling people, you know. Yeah.
It's like you want people to be like, oh, we need her on this track, like her music, her voice. Yeah.
Not that I'm not trying to like be a big deal. I just want to like.
Why not?
Be a big deal.
I don't know. I mean, I want to be successful, but I don't need to be like, I don't know. I feel like there's a difference between success. You don't have to be a big deal to be successful. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Not like the Lindsey Sterling. Like.
I'm not trying to be like that.
That's cool.
Cool.
Yeah.
So where can we find your music?
On all streaming platforms. Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube.
Ace period.
Ace period.
Ace.
Maybe.
That's it.
One day I want to be a big enough deal where I can take the period off my name.
Some copyright stuff. You got to buy that from
Yeah.
someone.
That's awesome. Well, we appreciate you being on. This is a ton of fun. We now know all the musical stereotypes.
Yes. That I don't believe, by the way.
That you
There's
fully
just-
endorse. and believe. Just percussionist over here. I'll just go into my weirdness.
You're
for the rest
the
of the I'm the other.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. This was super awesome, and I think this was a really awesome episode because we never really get arts type people on that much. So I think it was cool to kind of illuminate that world a little bit more. So thank you.
Thank you for having
Really
me.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.